Hello everyone and welcome back to the Cyclocross Social Podcast. Today we're back for another episode and with me here is Issam.
Yes, thank you for having me.
Today we're going to be discussing a question sent in by one of our followers. He was wondering if we could spend some time talking about the situation around Fem van Empel. We'll probably briefly touch upon the Giro and the Vuelta for women as well. But let's start with Fem van Empel, the three-time reigning cyclocross world champion. We briefly mentioned it before that she has taken a break from competition for an indefinite amount of time. At the time, we didn't really want to go into too much detail, and honestly, we still don't really want to do so. She's taking a break for mental health reasons, and it would be pretty inappropriate to speculate about what that exactly is or about just the potential signs that could or couldn't have been there. I think above all she says that the mental load on her has been relatively high, Issam, and if you look at the interviews that she's given, she's been pretty open about her mental struggles for past 2 years, I would say. Ever since she had that rise to the top, she has been quite open about how she struggles with expectations, especially this year when there was some critique on her, especially in the Belgian press, about how the expectations are so high and if she has a bad day, people are pretty reactionary and that she's not a robot. I think that's my main thing. If I look back on it, she's been open about it many times before, and this fits in a trend, and I don't want to get into too much speculation about the how, what, if, etc.
I think it would also be very difficult to speculate, but I think that it is obviously, she has been very open about it, I guess. And I think there were several indications in which you could see that she was at times quite harsh for herself. And obviously when you are at the top, there's always a lot of pressure. I think from our side as well, when we were talking about Van Empel and the expectations that we had for in terms of what she was able to do or what was possible for her, at least on the road, I think that we were definitely expecting quite something from her, I guess, because she's a special talent. She has the potential, I guess, and we were really looking forward to that. But that also comes at a cost, I guess, and it is the pressure must be immense also there with the team, and I can only imagine how that would be. And one is a bit better when the pressure is on compared to someone else, and there could be numerous factors to that. And as you said, speculating is so difficult and also not appropriate, I guess. And I think the main thing really is that you just hope that someone is able to, I would say, get into better times, be able to reset, get somewhat out of that situation and find the joy and enjoy it again, and see where it goes and not put a lot of pressure on, because that's also a thing. You should, when you're eventually getting out of such a spiral, you should also make sure that you're not getting back into that. And hopefully she's able to find the joy and get back on the bike, because I think that it would be, I think that on the road there's some untouched potential, and it just you just hope that someone, for her then, I guess, finds her way again back to road cycling and some good results.
Primarily, I just hope that she re-finds joy in whatever cycling discipline she wants to continue doing for the rest of her career in an environment that she prefers. As said, she's been very open about the expectations. She's also been open about being perfectionistic and always being striving for perfection and doing even better, even when she's out at the front, which is why in the interviews a lot of the times, and I think we've made some remarks which with the hindsight now probably aren't the nicest, but we did say it a number of times, like, she's always looking for something to improve. She's always critical of herself, and that can really be a burden for you if you continue being so harsh on yourself. And it's what makes athletes who they are and makes some of the world's best the world's best. But sometimes it can also be too much. So let's hope that things work out. We know that she's been running quite a lot recently. She participated in a Dutch 10K run and also did the quarter marathon, which is about 10K as well, in Rotterdam. Some decent times there, Issam, I know from you, but not the main point here, because the question was about something you alluded to. The question specifically asked us to discuss the state in the juniors and the U17s. How is that for young athletes right now? Because we are seeing more and more World Tour teams having development teams, hunting on the talent. Management is out there to try and get riders to join them. How is that? So, from my perspective, comparing it not only to when I raced, but some conversations I had with people who raced before me, what I see when I'm on the ground now, there is more pressure. We're seeing a movement which has really set in around Remco Evenepoel after his junior season. Teams were furious that they missed out on his signature, and you saw a reaction of teams trying to sign and not wanting to miss the next big thing. Development teams were formed, they created a structure. The UCI had a new rule implemented, which meant that there could be an exchange between development team riders and main team riders. And ever since, we've seen that a large majority of the World Tour teams, I think Movistar and Ineos are the only ones without, maybe Cofidis as well, but Ineos and Movistar are going to cross the bridge this year and also have a development team. So that makes pretty much all the World Tour teams and then a handful of the best Pro Conti teams hunting for junior talent. And as you can imagine, Issam, that is creating a certain set of expectations and a bar, because who doesn't want to become a pro cyclist when they're 16, 17 or 18 years old?
It's the dream coming true for many, I guess. And I think that is difficult to balance between the joy a child should have and really the professional aspect that it brings at such an age. If you look at the way the teams are trying now to find the next, as you say, like an Evenepoel, it has been comical at times, because you just kind of see almost a sort of desperation in signings and really trying to pursue in a way which is, I guess, from the outside a bit comical, but it's also, at the end of the day, it's basically children that are there feeling that pressure, I guess. And if you look at Cyclocross, for example, which I really noticed, and it was so weird, to be honest, I didn't expect it to go that way, I guess, but after the World Championships junior category, you always have some rumors, I guess, but that's, it doesn't happen that much. But now it felt like there were more eyeballs to that, and there was more attention, and Agostinacho was really the one that stole most of the attention, I guess, with his rumors, which eventually also somewhat came out. But it looked to me like teams were really looking at the championships and be like, oh, maybe there's a talent that I could pick up, sniff around a little bit, see if someone is interested in all that. And I think that it is, in terms of development of a rider, if you look at it from like objectively and stuff, it's definitely going to be better for a rider in terms of his development, and he will be able most likely to reach a potential. But I think that there is obviously an aspect of it which is more humane, I guess, and because a lot, going to be thrown at those riders. There is a lot of pressure. You need to be very independent. That struggle is sometimes a bit underestimated and also not really looked at, I guess, because even if you look at the media, to be honest, it's basically when they're reporting on certain signings, especially at those ages, they are basically super talent signed with team X, Y, and Z. And I don't think that should be the way we approach those signings, and we approach the way it's going there at the moment. And I hope, to be honest, that it improves. But I think it's a difficult situation.
First, I think it's important that we create a differentiation between the women's rider market and the men's rider market in the youth ranks, because this is especially appearing to be an issue or a cause of stress in the junior men's side. The junior women's side is different. The women's scene hasn't been established at this level of professionality with many high-level teams for this long. So there's a shortage of riders, and there's not really a race to be signed by Devo teams, but rather World Tour teams already acting and signing. For these few riders that are competing for World Tour riders, the effects are kind of the same. The riders that are in contention for a World Tour contract, I must say. But below, because there's such a shortage, most of the riders will find a way and they can get picked up a bit later. The problems on the women's side are different and more related to pyramid structure not really being there and riders getting thrown into the deep end right away because there's such a shortage of riders. Still, there you can have some overlap, but I just wanted to get that out of the way to really say that this is mainly an issue on the men's side, because that's where you're seeing the development teams compete, the World Tour teams competing, and then going to the extent that there are teams making contact with riders as young as the U17 category. And it's super reactionary. I think those are my two main worries. So first, as you say, there's not been that much media attention for this. The big people don't really speak out. They haven't heard Lappert chant about it, don't really hear the team bosses about it. But when the team bosses speak about it, I find it honestly a little bit disgusting that they just say, well, it's a race to the bottom, and everybody acknowledges that it's a race to the bottom and that it's not good. And many even indicate, yeah, the talent level at the U17s, at the juniors, it's not a true reflection of what comes in the elite category. So they admit that the less physically developed riders, especially the riders born in October, November, December, are getting fewer and fewer opportunities because the best riders of the age, the more developed, the more muscular riders, get signed earlier. They all say it's a race to the bottom, but still you can see and hear them talk about contact with the first or second year U17. Management's also venturing into that because they realize, hey, if we're starting at the juniors, we're already missing out because first year juniors, look at Leon Atkins now, for instance, good talent, but he's already signed a contract with Little Trek. He's a first year junior, hasn't even raced that much. There's a lot of examples like this which makes them move even earlier, and there's not really anybody speaking out about it, and it creates this big push and sense, which I think here's probably the most important thing here. You say fun should be at the core, and that's completely right, but at such an age, it's about developing yourself, learning who you are, learning what you stand for, what do you enjoy in life, what person do I want to be. That's what adolescence is about, it's what puberty is about. And this big push, it has self-motivation, riders that just completely focuses on cycling themselves, and you hear quite some stories, not a lot, but enough of them, of riders who then drop out as a U23 that say, I don't really have a life besides cycling, I don't really know who I am, I'm lost, I don't know what I enjoy. And secondly, there's a lot, and it's been so for as long as cycling has existed, that sometimes it's more the push of the parents to make it as a pro for their kid rather than that the kid wants it themselves. So this push from them and like making support from your parents dependent on results. There have been multiple stories of parents who after 2 years junior says, I'm not going to pay for your career anymore. It's done. You didn't make the World Tour team. Too bad. You need to earn a contract as second year junior, else I'm pulling the plug. And I think then you're far beyond the essence of sport, which should be active lifestyle promotion, fun, making connections with like-minded people of your own age. I think that should be at the core, and this push is hampering that.
It definitely is. The unfortunate part of it obviously is that it is something that we are seeing in several sport disciplines, right? It's the one thing that I can relate maybe the most to, or what I have seen, is obviously soccer, football. It has been an issue for I don't know how many years, and eventually they had to a restriction in terms of minimum of age in which you can sign a player. And at some points, the way they are treating basically children in a way is at times quite disgusting. And the personal connection that has to be between a team and a rider is at times lost. And it's basically, you have to perform, and if you don't perform, it becomes very difficult. And as you say, when those things arrive to a sport, you will always have certain parents that want to see their children achieve the highest possible level in sports. And I think in a way, obviously, it's good for parents to be passionate and try to help children achieve their dream, but it has to be the dream of a child, and it has to be something in which a child should not hurt his development in becoming what he wants to be in the future, and building a personality, as you say. And there's not much attention for that, which is in a way also somewhat understandable. I think that it has to be more, more people have to speak about it, and it's almost like we are waiting for something terrible to happen in terms of an interview or whatsoever, and then all of a sudden the attention will really be there, similar to what we have seen with football when there were just these stories of young children at the age of 12, 13 going to Barcelona, going to Manchester City, and at the age of 15, 16 getting dumped and basically have lost vital years and missed schooling or didn't have the proper schooling, and then are basically in a gap. It's difficult, and there is a lot of restrictions on it right now. It's not the same as it was, I would say, 10 years ago or something. Cycling should not reach that level, I guess, before we change something, or at least make sure that it is, the circumstances are better for juniors to be signed, or at least get through that process. I think that's obviously, we should not be able to reach those levels before we're going to be taking measures that will help them out.
You're right to point out those examples of dumping in other sports, because that is, at the end of the day, where most of the problems occur, right? It's not for the people who necessarily make a career out of it. They might run into some implications, the infamous black hole after the career later on. But that's different. The problem is with these talents or these young riders who are believing in themselves, or maybe even have right to do so, but don't eventually make it, which is completely fine and normal, but then get dropped for the reasons that you mentioned. And I completely agree with you that cycling should not be heading the way that football is headed. And yeah, it's improved a bit there, but there's still many dire examples of how things work there and the amount of pressure. So I would say that this new trend that we're seeing, the signing of these riders earlier, the step to the World Tour becoming apparently easier, is creating extra stress. Sure, in the past you had like the Rabobank team, which was a mainly Dutch junior team, and that created a lot of pressure here as well. Everybody wanted to be part of that team. This was before I raced, but I've spoken to people who raced in that time. Everybody wanted to be in that team. It was big happening. It created pressure. But the difference was that you signed with the Rabobank junior team, and if you were good enough, you signed with the U23 team, and if you were good enough, you signed with the elite team, step by step by step. Now these juniors are signing deals as a junior. 2 years development team, 2 years main team. As a first-year junior, maybe they've done 3 junior races, some haven't done any. That's what's creating the pressure, and especially in the U17s, I think it's a bit premature, like immediately being approached by these affiliated junior teams kind of in an arms race, because then you're maybe not technically in touch with the World Tour team yet, but the way that these affiliated teams approach these U17s is as an extension. Join our structure, we're affiliated with the World Tour team, look at us, shiny, we race on the same bikes as them, or even their old bikes, our director sportive, blah blah blah. They try and create a shiny package and wheel you in that way. And especially like juniors, I can see a bit of it, and I can argue that at that point you're 17, 18, you should have a degree of maturity to be able to deal with that. But at below 15, 16s, so many science points towards that not even being representative in endurance-based sports. So that's really where I would draw the line, especially because sometimes you see it when there's a rider coming from outside of the Netherlands and Belgium or outside of Europe, and they do a couple of races here in the summer on the road, and they get one win, and the next day they have 2 of these teams in their Instagram DM, hey, do you want to ride for us, or guest ride, or XYZ? And I think that's very reactionary and doesn't benefit these people and athletes in the long term. However, while this creates a bit of stress and pressure, I would also like to say that slightly older Issam, I think cycling has somewhat less pressure than some other sports because, relatively speaking, there's quite a lot of spots, whereas, let's say, extreme example here, Formula 1, most of the cases there, if you're dropped, you get one shot and you're done. Whereas in cycling, just like in football, if you don't make it at, let's say, Visma Lease a Bike or at any World Tour team, and pretty much, most of the times there will be slightly smaller team willing to take a shot, and you can quite often see that riders come alive in a different structure there.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that certain teams are always, for whatever reason, it could be financial reasons because they just don't really have the funding to buy the next talent in a way, and then they see someone in which they think that potential was there, but he was unlucky in his first 2 years as a professional cyclist, and then they want to somewhat take the risk, and they don't mind doing that. And the funny thing is that you actually see that times when you give a rider a second or third chance, that they actually thrive and get better and actually reach a level in which a team is reasonably happy with. So I think that it is funny to see that how the market then somewhat changes over years. And I think, cycling is normally should be a sport that it basically happens from the early ages, that it is just like that. Teams, someone having a good relationship with riders from the juniors, I guess, but not really this somewhat creepy way of trying to find the next talent and sliding in DMs or whatever they are doing. I think that to that extent, it should not really go. I feel that a natural selection should definitely be possible, and I can understand in a way a team trying to be as early. I don't blame them to that extent. I can understand that a team wants to be there at the very beginning of someone's career, I guess, and they want to maybe enable it and make sure that they are part of the development, and they don't have bad intentions, I guess. They really want to make sure that they are helping the riders out. But I just feel that with certain riders, you just need to give more time, and just the pressure and the way the market is now going, I don't think it's heading into a right direction, especially seeing that certain teams are pointing out that they have missed out on talent A, or it's just sometimes it's a bit comical, as I said before, but then it's also somewhat tragic if you put somewhat more the human side of it there as well, and you involve it in this situation. And I think then it becomes at times even a bit painful, I guess. And we should just hope that riders, that teams, I guess, take the responsibility and make sure that they are not involved in situations that are just dire for riders, and that the riders are just being put in situations which could harm not even their professional careers as a cyclist, but their lives as a whole, and somewhat get scarred. And when they're in the 40s, they say, I wish I never really thought of becoming a professional cyclist because of the experience they had at that time. So I really hope that that's something that we will never hear, but it's kind of almost inevitable, I guess, the situation and where we are heading.
I would like to see some legislation introduced by the UCI focusing on the human side. For now, you alluded to it before, but there doesn't seem to be much interest for this topic. While I do think it's a big problem, or a potentially even bigger problem, for now it's probably just within bounds of rationality. But yeah, I would like to see something come for there. And then I don't like what the only thing is I've heard from the UCI, which is that they want to perhaps ban juniors from working with the management. And then I think you're just making them very vulnerable to asymmetrical information, to signing bad deals for them. Because if you tell a 17-year-old, hey, next year you're going to make 200,000 euros, they're going to see all the money signs going right in front of their eyes, not realizing that they need to give a significant part to the taxman. Or if they sign a 5-year deal, that in the final year of their contract, they might be fighting for a Giro win. And at that age, they would be worth millions on the rider market rather than 200,000 euros. So I think that's something that should be considered in how to protect this. What do you do with regulations and clauses, and what do you make mandatory, and how do you protect them? Because I don't blame parents for not necessarily knowing what their kid is signing, because if you're the first rider coming through your family and your dad and mom just support you, they just work regular jobs, they're not lawyers, they don't know the insiders, then you don't really know what you're signing. So that's something that I think should be considered. And a second factor, which I think is perhaps more a cause of stress, is social media use. And I think this is a more like a society-wide issue, which also affects young people in cycling. But from what I've seen in the work with multiple riders, but the American groups I've been following with other teams that I had insights with of young riders, you see that a lot of them feel pressure to, well, not necessarily perform, but they feel the necessity to compete in the social media perfect world life of their results compared to others. And it's another factor where they're being confronted with people who have better equipment, who have better results than them, and they feel a significant pressure from their teams to post certain things and be active. And that, I think, is something that is also causing the stress. I know at the end of last year there were these articles about these riders, British riders, who were on the Quick-Step Devo team and stopped, and they alluded to that a little bit, and they also covered what we just mentioned before, that they just didn't really know why they were doing it and preferred other aspects of life. But I think a combination of these things explains part of the pressure, and ultimately, the end of the day, the question came down to, is it much more than before? I think that's impossible to quantify, but I do think these are two of the main factors currently pushing stress young athletes are experiencing in the sport of cycling, and that also carries over to cyclocross. Then, Issam, let's talk about some of these young talents who have been racing recently. We have a number of talented riders that are now first year U23 cyclocross related. We saw two of them in action in the Vuelta for women. We saw Imogen Wolf doing some lead-outs for Marianne Vos, and we saw Kat Ferguson taking a tumble in the first sprint stage because of a poorly designed final. It was also wet and there was a lot of painting on the road, but a corner 175 meters before the finish of a mass sprint stage is diabolical behavior from the organizers. But nevertheless, we've said it before, Ferguson has been doing very well, and I thought Wolf also did some good lead-outs, and that will give her some experience, and then in a year of 2, maybe 3, she'll be the one sprinting in Grand Tours like this.
Yeah, absolutely. I have to say I'm impressed, to be honest, with the progression those two have made, because I think they were definitely big talents, but I think the way they have manifested themselves in the peloton and the way they're racing, both, by the way, I think it's really impressive, I guess, at that age, to be able to perform in such a way. And, you know, they're basically in a sort of a learning phase, I guess, and it depends how long that will take. But this is only for the better, I guess, and it's just, you know, being able to be beneficial for the team or have good results or show yourself at the front. It also buys you, I guess, time in terms of your progress, and it makes sure that's some pressure, but I think that it helps you in with the position that you have within the team, and it's really promising the way they've been racing, and it's really looking good, and hopefully they can improve even more, and they are also hopefully able to combine it with cyclocross, because the danger is obviously there, in which the roads, they get better and better, and then eventually they make a decision in which I would not really like, I guess, where they focus more on the road and less on cyclocross, but it could be something that we are not even able to stop, I guess, because it's just, these decisions are sometimes made, and it's also preference, I guess. So we have to wait to see how that plans out all. But I think for now, if you look at the progression they've made, it's really promising.
I might say something that some might not expect from me, but I wouldn't hate the idea of them stopping with cyclocross, because they should do what they enjoy in the winter, right? If they really enjoy cyclocross, it's fine, but ultimately they are much better equipped to the combination of road and track. Both of them have done track and have done fairly well on it as well. I know there's this video of Ferguson where there's a day in her life video, a really nice video. You should look it up on YouTube if you want to watch it, but she alludes that track is the most boring discipline and she loves road most, and then cross, and she likes the suffering part of cross through the mud and the festivities. But the technical abilities of both Wolf and Ferguson are not good, to put it mildly, and especially of Ferguson, they're actually really problematic. And this is not just because she crashed in Hulst, but if you look at the national championships, how they raced there, but also the world championships in Ливан, if you see how they struggle in the muddy corners, then they are completely power-based riders. So their future is much more on the road. And while my heart, of course, would prefer them to stay in cross, because I want to see everybody stay in cross no matter their level, realistically, I don't think it would be a horrible idea if they don't heavily invest in cyclocross skills, which, seeing their road results, is not a realistic expectation. Then I wouldn't hate the idea of them focusing on road. Whereas for Géry, who raced in France, and she did fairly well. She finished 4th in the Pointe du Raz Classic and 7th in the GP Morbihan. For her, I think it would be more of a shame, because her technical skills are more robust, and I therefore see more of a future for her, whereas I think for Wolf and Ferguson, it will always be more difficult, because the types of courses that they can do well on will always be power courses, and if they involve too many technicalities, uphills are fine, but downhills that are technical, just cornering sections, mud, it's not looking good for them.
I see your point, to be honest, but I think that I might say that I'm a little bit more optimistic in terms of how much they can improve, the technical abilities on the cyclocross side. I think there's definitely possibilities there to grow and become one of the greats. I think it's possible, but it's just, as you say, you need to put a lot of work in to make that happen. But I think that, for Ferguson, it's probably a bit more difficult, because it just seems that it comes a little less natural, the technique. I think for Wolf, it also lacks a little bit. Maybe she has to put less work in, I guess, to get better technically. But I think the potential is just there, and it would be a shame if it would be somewhat untouched and the focus would be fully on the road. But as you say, it's understandable, and their profile really screams almost road cycling, and that most of the focus will be put on that. And I wouldn't blame them, to be honest. It would be a shame, but I wouldn't blame them, and I would definitely understand the decision made if that would be the case. But let's just hope that for at least for a couple of years they will still be somewhere around in cyclocross.
It also becomes dependent on results, what they do, right? So this year they were up against some stiff opposition in the U23 category, but if they develop through the ranks there and are able to approach the level that Géry showed this year in the upcoming season, then they might be more drawn to it, whereas else their success elsewhere will naturally draw them more towards that discipline. But as said, I think at the end of the day they should do what they enjoy, and I think I gave this example 2 episodes ago. But the Kastelein-Persico analogy, like Kastelein decides to focus on the road career. She does cross for fun, works out well, fits her riding style. Her technique wasn't that good. She was getting passed in the pecking order. Persico stopped with cyclocross at the top of her ability, was a top 5 rider in the world, was really good, had sufficient cyclocross skills, and I'm not a massive fan of that move by her. So I guess I would say Wolf and Ferguson, if they take the Castellane trajectory, I wouldn't be too disappointed from a results perspective, and I think it would make sense. Whereas for Gladanova, who has been taking a bit of a break now, and for Géry, I would be more disappointed and lean towards the Persico reaction. So there is a lot of talent to some, and one thing that I noticed, which I thought was interesting, is in the junior women's category, we spent quite some time talking about the first years last year, that there were a number of them doing extremely well. And they finished first, second, and fourth at the World Championships, for instance. And I noticed that pretty much all of them, and I guess by now I'm not really surprised anymore, but we saw Lise Vol race the Tour du Gévaudan Nations Cup race, finishing 13th in GC, 12th on the Monte Jalabert, which is up at the airport finish in the Tour de France. They've been there a number of times. I thought that was quite exciting to see, honestly, and the performance of Grossman, who finished third in Binda, surprised me. I didn't really think she had that in her, but here we're seeing two mountain bike riders, because that's the priority of both, do quite well in these Nations Cup races early on.
Yeah, and it's going to be interesting how that development will continue, I guess, and how the decisions will be made, because obviously mountain bike is also quite a hard discipline, and the top at times is very difficult to reach, I guess, and really have a breakthrough. But it is a Olympic discipline, and obviously that will also play a role in ambition, I guess. And it's something that we have noticed, right? That on the women's side, these basically juniors or first years under 23, they come through and they immediately have somewhat of an impact in the races. And I think that is also somewhat nature of the the women peloton and how the racing goes, because it's just really in certain races you can feel that the sport is in a full development, and it's just improving year after year, and it's getting better and better, the level. But it also means that just these younger riders have their development and the chances that they have gotten, and the I guess their way through the ranks, I guess, has been so much better than certain riders had the chance to get to that level, I guess. And I think that obviously helps. Of course, they are incredible talents, but I think it's also somewhat nature of the development women's cycling is in, and it's a pleasure to watch, to be honest.
Most certainly, and we're always following the talent and what they're doing. Agustin Accio took a win in the peace race, one of my favorite pieces of history in terms of cycling, the peace race and the relations in the Cold War, and how that was the Soviet version of the Tour, but in communism only for amateurs and such. And it's quite cool that it's now developmental behind me here, and I think this is a encouragement for us to get going on a video podcast. There is a artifact, a bell from the 1980 peace race, which they used to indicate the final lap of the race. But enough about the peace race. I can also fill you in on some details that my former university teacher at Utrecht University finished 14th in the Vuelta for women. But the final point we need to get to here is briefly the Giro Issam, because we saw about Van Aert race there. But yeah, actually, what can we say? He's been sick, and therefore his performances aren't that good. Is that it? Do you maybe want to comment more on some transfer rumors about Quinten Hermans and Gianni Vermeers?
Yeah, I think on Van Aert, I think you're spot on. I think that this Giro will do him well. It's a bit of a shame how he entered it, but I think that there's still not really a reason to completely panic. We just have to wait and see how that will progress, and I think he definitely has a shot at winning a stage at some point. It's just a matter of trying to grow in the Grand Tour and see how it will go. But yeah, it wasn't great. He was close the first stage, but overall, it's just trying to get a better feeling, I guess, for him, and that will eventually come. I have no doubt that eventually it will get better for Van Aert, but obviously it wasn't the greatest. But yeah, rumors. There have been quite some rumors. I mean, I've heard about Johnny Vermeers that he is looking to leave, and it's not only him. There are quite a few that are looking into changing it up. I mean, Kilich as well. There is some interest from Visma Leasebike in trying to get Kilich, but you also Sudo Quickstep is looking into him, and I think that if you look at how he has been racing this year as well, I think that it is definitely a great talent, and would be somewhat of a loss for Alpes in the Koning. But I think maybe an interesting thing about Alpes in the Koning really is that it seems that they are not really going to be able to hold on to that many riders. They rely on some of the talent that will get through, and I'm somewhat wondering if that has something to do with the fact that they are still not really able to find that second sponsor that they, I guess, need to make sure to know what their transfer budget for next year is going to be, because it's a bit of a weird side at the moment, the way they have been. It seems that even Hermans is keen to leave. It looks to me like that is quite some important riders look on their way out there.
I can only imagine that has to do with the fact that they don't have the financial power at the moment to compete, as they don't have a second sponsor secured, as you said. On the other hand, they have Tibor de Grosso coming through, which will be, I think, a more than worthy replacement of Vermeers, who I think has already not been as good as he was a few seasons ago. Kilich leaving is, of course, a shame, but he'll definitely be able to make more than the contract he was on right now. And then you have their extensions. They have extended Dillier, they've extended Riesebeek to core people, and Hermans is an expensive rider for them. And when I hear Q36.5 is interested, I immediately think there is a quite high likelihood that they are going to be overpaying him, and that's not really what Alpes intends to do. So yeah, it's difficult because obviously they need some domestiques to replace what they're losing, and that's not easy, but they were linked to Brent van Moer, so I think at the end of the day they'll be fine, but it's probably not the best situation to be in if that sponsor situation drags on for too long. Good, then I think we've covered it. I expect we're going to be back in 2 weeks' time, Issam, because then we'll have had the Nove Mesto Mountain Bike World Cup, but that is also in the final week before my thesis deadline, so no hard promises.
I can't wait for mountain bike to return back on my screen, to be honest. It's left and right we are seeing some results, but obviously World Cups are the way to go, I guess, for me to really get back into the mountain bike scene. So can't wait for that, and hopefully we'll be there covering it, not there, but here sitting in my room and talking the listeners through the race and giving our opinions on it. So yeah, hopefully we'll do that, and thank you for having me.
Nothing is stopping you from going to Nove Mesto, Issam.
You know what? This is actually it's funny you mentioning it, because last week I was thinking about it. I was like, not about this year, to be honest. I don't really have plans, but it is a race that I really want to visit, and I've never been to a mountain bike race, especially not a World Cup event. So that is definitely something that I have on a bucket list, short list, whatever you want to call it. I'm planning to go there definitely, but I don't think it will be for this year. But who knows? Maybe next year.
Who knows? We'll see. I'm planning to make it to the World Championships in Crans Montana, hopefully. So fingers crossed for some mountain bike coverage. Thanks everyone for listening, and we will be back fairly soon. Goodbye.